NSFW or Reddit, what was your oh shit, this person is a psychopath moment when meeting people? A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but didn't want to be a dick like everyone else, so I said yes, but I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me he likes burying things alive. Sometimes he seals the jar tight, sometimes gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at that time. I'm 52 now and it still makes me sick to think about that. Okay, wow, this is literally the worst one by quite a long way. How bizarre and horrendous and well thought out. Absolute psycho. Cruelty to animals at a young age is literally considered a key diagnostic criteria for actual clinical psychopathy, so yeah. I was friends with a couple. The wife made up her affair with me to hurt the husband's feelings. The husband showed up in my condo with a gun and was detained by the security guards and later the police. I had no idea about any of it until later when the condo security contacted me. It's crazy how you can just be dragged into a situation that can easily get you killed. The fact she tried to hurt his feelings that way makes it clear it's a very unhealthy relationship. I, 20F, was dating this dude, 23M, for a few months and we were getting on really well, then we both ended up having to move for our jobs at around the same time. He wants to try long distance so we call most days and watch movies together in our off time. The time zones mess it up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue one day, he just says he doesn't want to be together. I'm like wow okay, a little blindsided but sure. So I start just going about normal life again, and hanging out with friends, the normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs to get back together. Movie-type stuff, sending flowers to me at work, sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles, and even bought me a ticket to fly out to see him. So I'm like okay, whatever, I'll go and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I just fly home. So I got a ticket for 2 days after because I just figured I could head out if he was being a dick. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be. Just telling me he missed me and he regretted it as soon as it happened and it was the biggest mistake of his life, the usual. So we stay with his family because he's like, oh please don't get a hotel, I already feel bad enough about the whole month, just stay with us. And I just thought hey, free room I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first few days and then I get this alert on my phone and it's a hurricane warning and saying they're pushing my flight for 4 days later. I'm like, crap. I need to get back to work. I only took like 3 days. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it and he's like, oh, I know. We already started boarding up the windows. I was a little freaked out but not too much because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So the next morning, he shakes me and wakes me up and tells me to come to the living room. I was like okay. When I do, it's him, his 2 brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad, people I have only met on this one instance, and he has a binder. They sit me down and each of them reads a passage from the binder of why we shouldn't be together, and why I need to move on, and he breaks up with me, in his parents' house, in front of his siblings, in the middle of a hurricane power outage. Then, because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 4 more days with these freaks. Probably not the most psychopath person I've met, but this story is still just so strange to me, I had to post it. What the, that's wild OMG. Was walking my dog down a main road, on lead, a lady was walking her dog off lead. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to stop. She had no control of it. Her dog lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a lead. She said she will stamp on my dog's head and let her dog kill mine. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on my walk. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later with her children inside. Luckily they were okay, but yeah, madness. That story got wilder with every sentence. Was chatting away with a guy in a pub. Seemed like a normal nice dude, got on really well. Some point in the conversation he casually mentions he's not long out the jail for torturing a guy. He never said torturing, he said what it was he did to him. He slipped it into the conversation so casually as if he was telling me about running to the shop for a pint of milk. Never saw it coming. Asked around another day and confirmed he wasn't full of shit. Did he get used to telling the story in jail and forgot he was out? This story makes me angry. So, one time, a friend came over and brought a new friend with them. Seemed like a nice guy. He was quiet and kept to himself. I was a young, single woman and far too trusting of people at the time, I think. So, my friend mentions that this guy has just recently got out of prison. I ask him what he went away for. He then proceeds to tell me that he and his friends had followed a young girl into a local park and raped her using various sharp objects they found on the ground. They each got extremely long sentences, his happened to be 12 years. What made everything worse was that he ends the story with the fact that she killed herself because she couldn't live with what they did to her. Needless to say, he was never allowed around my home again, and I had a very stern talk with my so-called friend. Edit asterisk just to clarify, the guy friend I got rid of him quick sticks, but I felt unsafe and had to do so over a short time period. The fact that he had associated with such scum and that I was a young lady living alone at the time was the reason he only got a stern talking to. Not only did it not occur to him to avoid this guy, but the fact that he brought him into your home having knowledge of that incident. I'd steer clear of that friend entirely after that. Poor girl though, rest in peace. 12 years is not a long sentence for that. That's life without parole worthy. Maybe not legally, but he needs to be there. My brother. As a kid he used to enjoy watching animals die. As an adult, there were plenty of moments which reminded me that he was little changed. The scary thing was the complete indifference he would display when you tried to explain why doing stuff like this was wrong. It was like the thing that would normally naturally horrify people over committing such incidents was just completely lacking in him. Serial killer in the making. Geesh. Yeah, pretty much. He even once drowned a neighbor's cat to death in a sink because he didn't like it in his garden. As a kid, he used to enjoy drowning rats a lot. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he says, "Isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and kill us all right now?" I told him to get off on the next exit and cancelled the ride. I also reported him to Uber so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. Really should have kept that intrusive thought to himself. I met the new boyfriend of an acquaintance and within 10 minutes of the conversation he was referring to women as holes. It was amazing how I suddenly remembered that my husband had requested I come help him with something. Sounds like the same type of guy that would lose his shit if another man were to refer to him as a hole. Man forgot he has holes too. When he just casually mentioned putting a cat in a cage and then putting the cage in water so he could watch it drown like it was no big deal and like it was something everyone has done at least once. Where others don't F*** with cats people to come sort this guy out. Went on a date once and she casually dropped how she killed her brother's hamster with perfume as a kid BC. She was mad at him like it was just a quirky little story to laugh about. Needless to say I started looking for an exit strategy at that point. At a party in high school or just after it, we were doing late night juvenile things like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well except the new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up but he admitted to the entire group that he had sexually assaulted a dog. We were drunk and high but everyone sobered up with that. We were too young to know what to do with that information but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful to a helpless animal but admitting it to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. She came late to our date, immediately ordered a drink and burger, then told me she was late because of a family thing. Before the burger arrived she mentioned she'd have to cut our date short because she was having a family dinner. I was like, Okay, all good. Then she told me that the craziest thing had happened where her sister met a dude on Tinder and they ended up going to a family barbecue and it ended up with them getting married. Before her burger even arrived, she said, "Wouldn't it be funny to pull a prank on my family? Like, you and me went to my family barbecue and let everyone assume we were really hitting it off and they'd totally think we were gonna get married." I'll admit I'm also the psychopath in this story cause I went. Good mashed potatoes. She spent all night introducing me as her future fiancé and I had to take a Tinder break after that. At a party, once I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked if there were things she liked about her job, she beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mothers or infants. She spoke primarily of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments, and how even after delivery she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there was going to be life-changing complications. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these people's lives were in her hands. The conversation steered in other directions amongst partygoers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experiences. She shared an anecdote on how she was rejected for an advanced choir position, and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having control over other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. After moving to a new city a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We're both 30-something dudes. We were out at a bar when a guy asked to sit with us because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine. Being polite, we start talking to the guy. He told us he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and at some point mentioned he was ex-military. From there, things began to get strange but slowly, like the proverbial frog in water being brought to a boil. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother, it might have been a twin, I can't recall, who was in the CIA, embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense that this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us, telling increasingly tall tales about his time in the military. He eventually confessed that there was no brother, he was the spy who'd been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how, even though his stories got more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought. And the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate this menacing air that hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scary he could be, and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a, not very convincing, Russian accent. Alas, he was never a spy for the US. He was a double agent, a one-man Russian sleeper cell. But he couldn't bear lying to me, he had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom, abandoned our cards and dipped, post-haste. My ex-fiancé told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry so we could have a boy first, as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not as he headed to the expressway. I asked him where we were going and he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke and began a diatribe about our love and how we would be together forever, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart and no matter if I saw it yet or not. I again asked him where we were going, and he said a neighboring state where no one would know or find us with a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day but I can't recreate. All very calm. I had to call my mother and she had to talk him down, beg him to bring me back home. Added bonus, when I was back home and refused to see him, he stood outside my family home through all hours of the night and started singing songs to me over the phone about how he was going to burn my house down and kill everyone inside if I wouldn't go outside and talk to him. I've been a public school teacher for a decade. I've only ever been scared of one student. First of all, this was in my first few years of teaching. This student was of myth in my school. I taught at an alternative school for students that had been expelled from every other school, but, overall, my students were chill. They weren't good students, but if you met them at their level, things were usually fine. The exception was JT. JT was a sophomore when I met him, but, at that point, I didn't teach him, but boy did I hear about him. Somehow, his mom was able to game the paperwork and education system enough that this kid was unpunishable. Everything was technically covered under a litany of 504 plans and IEP paperwork, so much so that this kid literally pushed a 8-month pregnant teacher down and he was back 2 weeks later. He could literally punch a kid in the mouth and be back 2 days later, and, because of this, he was just a massive problem. The first terrifying discovery for me was that his mom was very vocal about not wanting him home because she was scared of him. She had a good reason to be. JT, as a small child, tried to murder his family by lighting their house on fire, specifically trying to murder his brother by duct taping him to his bed while he slept. His brother survived, but had horrific burns, but somehow, that didn't stop him from supporting his almost murderous brother. JT was ruthless, but he was also about 5 feet 4 inches, and his Kruger brother was about 6 foot and much physically stronger. I finally had the pleasure of teaching JT in his senior year. He had approximately 10 credits, all gym-based, and was nowhere near graduation. My first note was that this is the only kid I've ever met that just had nothing going on behind his eyes. He was shark-like, he never smiled or laughed unless someone got hurt. Cruel for cruelty's sake. One day, JT wasn't there, which, frankly, was odd. He had a great drug business going at school and he only had to avoid one cop. The next day, we found out why he wasn't there. JT murdered a kid. Shot him in the face for $12 and a little bit of weed. His lawyer tried to get his sentence lowered by arguing that it was technically his first offense since everything else happened when he was a kid. He got 25 to life. On my first day at my new job, my coworker told me she traps spiders under glass cups in her bathroom and cranks up the heated floor to cook them alive.